Hi, I'm Sonya White Jaguar. Welcome to White Jaguar Weekend Read, my weekly audiobook series. Today I'm reading the conclusion of my book review of Madly Deeply, The Diaries of Alan Rickman. Let's continue. Alan made eloquent statements about acting in his diaries that could have been fleshed out and made into a meaningful book. Quote, circa 1974, "Fine acting always hits an audience with the force and oneness of the well-aimed bomb." Leicester, December 1975. "Theater is the only living way to say, here is you, here is me. This is what we do to each other. This is what we could do to each other. It is at once a celebration and a warning, a reminder and an encourager." January 1978. "A still more ruthless determination to be an actor, not anybody's puppet, or at most, a walkie-talkie doll. I am ultimately the servant only of the play. That, however, implies generosity to fellow actors and willing listener to directors, not of someone's distorted view of my offstage persona." 13 August 1993. "Doctor for film insurance checkup. He throws me by asking which character I would choose above all others to play. There's no answer because, as ever, it all depends on the script." Unquote. In interviews Alan had given over the years, which I've seen on YouTube, he didn't talk about his favorite roles. That gave me the impression he had none. His statement that it all depends on the script reveals that roles weren't his focus. He cared about the writing and made choices based on whether he wanted to be part of a particular story. I could tell that Alan didn't like giving interviews, as he was vexed by journalists' repetitious questions. One time he wrote, quote, "A day of a kind of internal collapse, a mixture of airplanes, jet lag, and depression, from days of eating one's own flesh in interviews that have no real motor," unquote. One of the sad ironies of Alan's life is that on one hand he was an intelligent man and a talented artist who was rewarded for his efforts, while on the other hand he was a pessimist who struggled to appreciate those rewards and find meaning amid chaos. The entries below betray his jadedness. Quote, 19 February 2007. "Vague sense of watching bits of my life being put on a record player like some album that's as irritating as it is loved. Or it's the mouse in a wheel thing of who is controlling what here, not helped by feeling a bit used in the work area and a bigger bit irrelevant in the world. This in spite of loving generous phone calls about Snowcake, something I'm proud of and which does have a point. This is one of the more painful paradoxes." 8 February 2009. "BAFTA night. Oh God, how many more awards can we give ourselves? On the news, Australia burns and Gaza is in ruins." Unquote. Throughout his diaries, the actor recorded being plagued with insomnia as stress was taking its toll on him. While reading, I often wished I could send Reiki energy to comfort him. One time he said, quote, "Awake trying to locate one worthwhile nameable emotion that deserves this sleeplessness. The dream was of walking down one's own corridor at night in the dark, trying to work out the geography only with my hands, finding doors that should have been locked, not." Unquote. Alan was human. He wrote about falling downstairs, burning his hand on a hot saucepan, and hurting his wrist after tripping over a tree railing. In one entry, he talked about moving to a new property. When the movers arrived, one of the workers apologized for staring at him starstruck. Alan wrote, quote, "It takes me a while to catch on, and then it takes him a minute to catch on that he's staring at someone frazzled, dusty, and ordinary." Unquote. Alan's pains aren't the only experiences printed in Madly Deeply. As a longtime fan of music, I appreciated the passages about concerts he attended and CDs he purchased. I also enjoyed reading about the vacations he took around the world. I was pleased he was able to find time for himself, like this day at his home in Tuscany, which sounded like a Zen moment. Quote, 6 a.m. swim. The air and the water are precisely the same temperature, and one of the joys of this pool and this garden is that you can swim naked. You, the air, the waking sun, and the water." Unquote. Never having been to Italy, I was envious of Alan's visit to the Sistine Chapel. He wrote, quote, 20 August 1997, Rome. "We clambered out of bed and made it to the Sistine Chapel queue at 8:30 a.m. It already wound around the block for 150 yards. But getting in was fairly painless. I wish I had the nerve to just lie on the floor and look at it. or on some trolley on wheels, maybe much as Michelangelo did. Stroll out feeling like a great big human being, unquote. I was moved by a lunch Alan and his wife Rima Horton had enjoyed with his mother and aunt. He said, quote, and hopelessly touching, with Rima and I, hands on the handles of a wheelchair each, out for a walk around the park as all four of us paused to look at the magpies waddling about in the sunset, unquote. Alan was with me each time I sat reading his diaries. My third eye chakra pulsed whenever he tried to read my impressions. He cared about what I thought and sometimes reacted to a passage before I read it. One time he gasped so loudly that it sounded as if he was physically in the room. I knew that meant something significant was coming up. I had no idea what until I turned the page and read several entries leading up to the death of his mother. In my memoir on Wattpad, From Actor to Healer, Alan Rickman's New Life as a Spirit Guide, Book 1, I explained that Alan had told me he didn't fully grieve the loss of his mother in this life. Having witnessed the passing of my parents, I was deeply moved by this part of Madly Deeply, and I appreciated being able to share in Alan's loss. He wrote, quote, 13 February 1997, after supper and back to the hospital. As we arrive, Mum wakes, but it's from a diamorphine sleep. She's gazing at the ceiling. Something fascinating up there beyond the veiled eyes. It's the deepest kind of heartbreak to watch. 16 February 1997. Writing in retrospect. Rima and I both sleepless. At 7:15, there is a knock at the door. From Michael's voice, or maybe it is from the knock, I knew that Mom had gone. Michael just capsized into the room, desolate that she had died without us. But it could have happened while we were having a cup of tea in a corridor, turned away for a second. But of course, nothing takes away that shaft of guilt. We all pull ourselves together and drive to the hospital where Joyce, the nurse, is waiting. It was as she turned away for a moment. Mum snatched her space. I have tried to rehearse the inside of my head for months now, and as I write this, I don't know how much I have accepted. But walking behind those closed curtains and seeing her yellowish face and still body is not something you can ever be ready for, unquote. The transitions of life and death are recurring themes in Alan's diaries. A worldwide transition that many of us, including myself, are still processing is the coronavirus pandemic. When the reopening of shuttered businesses was still uncertain during the height of the shutdowns, Alan had told me that he was disheartened by the number of theater closures around the world. As a fervent supporter of the arts in life, he revealed to me he'd made donations over the years to many that were now permanently closed. While reading his diaries, I stopped for a moment at one entry where Alan discussed his visit to a theater in South Africa. Quote, 12 February 2010, Cape Town, 5:30 car to Fugard Theater. It's in District 6, an amalgam of a church and warehouse, plaster and ghosts clinging to the walls. A beautiful theater, stunning rehearsal room and jaw-dropping roof with Table Mountain as a backdrop. The magic flute was as transporting as ever, unquote. I'm not a patron of the arts like Alan was, so I'd never heard of the Fugard Theater. Nevertheless, something tugged at my heart and compelled me to look up this playhouse. Sadly, the Fugard was permanently closed in 2021 due to the pandemic. This might be one of the places Alan had been alluding to during our earlier conversation. When I bought Madly Deeply, I was particularly interested in learning more about Alan's experience with cancer because I'd lost my parents and both grandmothers to this dreadful disease. I found out that Alan had had cancer twice, like my relatives. In 2016, the media reported that Alan had died of pancreatic cancer. Now I learned that he'd also suffered from prostate cancer 10 years beforehand. As I explain in From Actor to Healer, Alan Rickman's New Life as a Spirit Guide, Book 1, I had reached out to Alan the day he died because I felt sorry that he'd lost his life to cancer. Not being a fan or knowing anything about him, I sensed that he'd suffered terribly. Whenever I asked Alan for more detail, though, he wouldn't answer. If I asked telepathically, he would remain silent. If I asked yes-no questions and let him respond by turning on 2 mini Maglite flashlights, he would leave the lamps off. Later, he told me that it was too painful to discuss. Now, in 2022, the publication of his diaries finally provided me with answers. In the afterword, Horton explains, quote, Alan had 6 months between diagnosis and death, which is typical for pancreatic cancer, where the average is 3 months, because there is currently no diagnostic test, and the symptoms are so nonspecific. I have become a trustee of Pancreatic Cancer UK in the hopes that we can raise money to fund research to develop the diagnostic testing that might have saved Alan's life," unquote. Although the book doesn't state it directly, I hope that proceeds are used to help fund pancreatic cancer research. A few days after I'd begun reading the book, I got up the courage to jump ahead and peek at what Alan had written in 2015 before his death. At the time, I was reading the ebook version, but I had also purchased the hardcover edition for archival purposes. I decided to open the hardcover to 2015 as that would be faster and easier and I wouldn't lose my place in the ebook. After a doctor appointment in summer 2015, Alan wrote, quote, "a different kind of diary now," unquote. An editorial footnote explained that that was when the actor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I imagine it was too devastating for Alan to write more. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was packing to move to a new property at the time and begin anew. As he sorted and discarded keepsakes, he alluded to a new life, quote, "space for a new set of starting blocks," unquote. Alan suffered a stroke weeks after beginning chemotherapy. His subsequent entries were short notes about social engagements and medical visits with no comments about his health or mental state. Picturing this poor man in pain, who now knew he was dying, stirred the emotions deep in my heart. Tears poured from my eyes, and I cried into one tissue after another. For the first time in 6 years, I grieved the actor's death. As I wept, Alan yelled, "Put the book away! Put the book away!" He shouted so loudly he sounded like a physical man standing beside me. I reluctantly murmured, "Okay." I wanted to insert a bookmark so that I could return to the page later. So I got up from the kitchen table and went to grab a bookmark from the bookcase in my dining room. As the stack of bookmarks on the shelf shifted, a small piece of cardstock fell out. I caught it as it drifted toward the floor. Here it is. On the front is a scribbled note from an old friend that reads, "Each page turned embraces a new adventure." I didn't remember saving it. I must have tossed it there a long time ago, thinking I could use it as a bookmark. This was unquestionably a message from Alan. He was telling me not to mourn his death. No one knows better than I do that he has turned a page and begun a new adventure. However, that didn't stop me from sobbing again. After that incident, I needed time to recover, so I set Madly Deeply aside for a few days. The day I resumed reading, I was streaming a weekly Billboard Top 40 countdown show on my smartphone. Although I play that radio program often, I don't ordinarily listen while reading. However, I was enjoying that week's countdown from 1986 and didn't want to turn it off. Most of the songs I'd heard before, as they were classics that I've loved since 1986, my most favorite year of 1980s rock and roll. But then a track played that I didn't remember. I stopped reading as Corey Hart sang the song's title repeatedly. "I am by your side. I am by your side. I am by your side." All I could do was stare at my phone in disbelief. Alan was telling me that he was by my side. At that moment, I asked Alan if he would speak with me. He said yes. "Why did you continue journaling late in 2015?" I asked. "You knew your life was ending. Reading that was heartbreaking." Alan replied, "I don't know. I had to do it. Something compelled me onward. It would be incomplete if I hadn't continued through to the end. As far as I could go, anyway. I just wanted to do it. It kept me sane all those years, keeping a diary. I know it seems silly, but I liked recording my thoughts. Sometimes I didn't know what I was saying. I made additional notes later and changed some thoughts. I know what I was doing, or what I thought I was doing. I thought I might survive, weirdly enough. I know that sounds totally ridiculous, but I had hoped. I fought so hard." Alan sobbed for a moment. "I wanted to live." "The urge to fight, to survive, is very strong," I said. "I understand this. You were a fighter." "I wrote because my heart, my soul needed a break. That's all. I knew it would all make sense in the end. I didn't know what I was doing at that point, really." To lighten the mood, I joked, "Well, now that you've cleared up that mystery, let's order a pizza." I chuckled and added, "I see how it is after death. We look back and say, 'That was fun. Now let's go get a pizza.'" Alan roared laughing. Later that afternoon, when I stepped out the front door to go to my mailbox, I noticed a piece of trash near the door. Thinking nothing of it at first, I picked it up to throw in the garbage. Then I looked more closely at it. It was a tattered flyer from a pizza shop I'd never heard of called Pizza Guys. I saved it. Here it is. On the bottom corner, under a colorful picture of pizzas, bold letters state they'd been in business, doing it right since 1986. Not only was Alan poking fun at my pizza joke, but he was also ribbing me for my love of songs from 1986. On the other side of the flyer is a pink American Cancer Society logo with another pink logo above it that reads, "Raising Dough for a Cure." Fine print at the bottom, partially torn off but still readable, states that $1 of your purchase would be donated to help fund cancer research. Unbelievable how Alan had to have the last word. I sensed that he was letting me know in his own way the proceeds from his diaries would be used to help fund pancreatic cancer research. When I asked Alan for his perspective on Madly Deeply, he replied, "The book is an incomplete picture, to be sure, but they are my words in the heat of the moment, you could say, and how I put my thoughts down. Sometimes I agonized over what to write. Sometimes I wrote nothing of my true feelings. I wanted to record dates and people's names so I would remember them. The diaries gave me a place to vent my feelings when I was disappointed. I know you understand that, and others understand that too. I know readers want more, and I'm sorry I'm not there to provide more detail. I know how incensed people are and wondering why caustic opinions are being published when I was such a private man. It seems counterintuitive, and I see their point of view. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't happy that people are reading reviews and purchasing the book. I'm glad people see the truth about me. The book is a peek into my life, and I stand by what I wrote each day." While Alan's diaries provide intriguing sketches of the actor's life events, they don't reveal his perspective after the fact, once he'd had time to fully process those events and elaborate on his notes. Love is at the heart of Alan's current work as a guide, healer, and teacher across dimensions, where love is the answer. Because Alan didn't have the opportunity in life to edit his diaries or publish his own work, I asked him if he would now like to write something of his own about love. He agreed. Several evenings in October 2022, I talked with Alan at length, asking him questions and typing his responses. He impressed me with a frank discussion about his love of life, romantic love, and love in the higher dimension. What resulted is a short book I published on Wattpad titled Alan Rickman on Love, a Channeled Commentary, which I will read next time. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and you'll be notified when the next video is posted. You can also sign up for my newsletter on my website, sonyawhitejaguar.com, and get notified that way. I send out newsletters twice a month. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.